So I'll do the sort of background bit and the strategy thing, and just to put in context a little of things, because this is what we did on the strategy day. We actually sort of thought about the context in which we're functioning as a society. And I think it's worth reminding us that we're a very old and established society. 1894 was when we got going, so well over 100 years. And I think one of the ambitions may be that in 100 years' time there's a group sitting in a place like this having the conversation as well. So that's kind of an uber aim, which I've just made up. But it's worth noting that actually through the last few years we've done well as a society. Membership's gone up. Mel Bale here, who as most of you all know is our membership secretary, keeps an eye on that and makes sure we have all the all the fees coming in and all that sort of thing, has been reporting to us now for the last 3 years that the membership has gone up, and I think it's around 1,400 now.
1,400 at the moment, yeah.
Yeah, which is fantastic actually. It's a substantial...
If there's anybody here who hasn't yet renewed, please do so. Save us having to send out even more reminders.
Yes, so do keep that up. So interesting though, we also have done well on inspectors, and I know many of you here are footpath inspectors, and to be honest, without inspectors really it's very difficult for us to make progress, because we need people going out looking at the public rights of way, reporting on them on our fantastic database, but we've got now about 180. And I know that about 3 years ago we only had about 110. So I think that again, and David Gosling with Linda Smith look after the inspectors, and that's another fantastic bit of progress. So what's the theory as to why this has happened? Well, there could be all sorts of things, but I do think that the COVID pandemic brought home to people how important it is to have paths to walk on, and did a lot of local walking, and I think we really burgeoned during that time. My sense is it's slightly flattening out, but that's perhaps just a sense of it. Mel's nodding. Interestingly, the last time we had a strategy day was back in 2018. As I say, we've had to postpone because we felt we wanted to meet in the flesh. And of course, we've not been able to do that until the last few months. But at that time, back in 2018, there were 5 key priorities. One was around recruiting volunteers. The second was around publicity and promotion. Third was around data management. Fourth was monitoring planning applications. That's a really important part of what we do. And the fifth was improving footpaths. And I think it's fair to say that on many of those we've made good progress. As I've said about the volunteers, the information things are improving. We've got website development. There will be a new website before long, and Mel and David and one of our trustees called Suzanne, who's not here today, have all been working on that. But there are some of those areas, possibly publicity and promotion, for example, where we've not really made the progress we would like to. So, as I say, we've weathered the storm well. One of the other things that is a sort of totemic thing and I know David Morton, who looks after our signposts, doesn't necessarily like us referring to it like that, but a really important thing for us is our signposts. And I think we've got over 600 now of those across the whole region. And, you know, the region is, as you know, this sort of Midland northwest bit of the country, going down to Staffordshire, up to sort of Yorkshire, and across to Merseyside and Cheshire. It's not necessarily that we've got them everywhere, but we have a lot. So that's gone on and carried on throughout the last few years. Our treasurer can't be here today. He's got something has come up at the last minute that he has to do. But alongside all of the other things, our finances are in reasonable order. We've got quite good finances. And over the last few years, we've actually been using some of those to improve paths and bridges and so on. So again, we're in a healthy position from that point of view. And indeed, it's not that long ago that we changed our investment advisors. Though, as you'll be aware, the context in which we function is a very, very challenging one across the nation and indeed probably across the world at the moment. And I think, you know, it is fair to say that most people's investments will have seen a downturn rather than uptick. So that's something we want to keep a close eye on. The other thing we've done over the last few years is, in particularly this last year, is increase the number of trustees. So we've now got 11 trustees, and we've broadened the range of skills amongst those trustees. And I think we've sorted out a bit more what I would call the governance of the organisation, so that we're clearer on what's happening where and so on. And we've still more work to do on that. So what did we do when we thought about where we were? What did we do on the day of the strategy discussions, which was the end of September? Well, we came up with a number of areas to discuss. And if we think about our own selves and we look around, we're not getting any younger, are we? So we thought it was important to think about succession planning. And we've got some really key roles. We have a group who come together as the Courts and Inquiries meeting, of which, say, Rhoda and Terry are key members. And they hold a tremendous amount of knowledge, expertise around the legal side of things. So who are the next people they're training up who are coming along? Who are the next treasurers and secretaries and so on and so forth? So we thought succession planning was useful to discuss. We have a constitution, which you can see on our website. It's not the most fascinating things, constitutions, but we thought we should discuss whether that needed reviewing. And we talked about finance. So whilst we've got a reasonable amount at the moment, we wanted to discuss fundraising, not something the Society's ever done. We get some legacies, which is, sad but very helpful. And we have our membership fees, which have largely stayed static, I think.
Absolutely, yeah.
Absolutely
Yeah,
static. And we manage on all of that. But depending on our ambition, what about fundraising? We also wanted to talk about what you might call the operating model, sort of relating to how does the internal workings work, and should we be giving, for example, more freedom to people working in their patches. What might our improvement goals be? What are we trying to achieve? So inspecting paths is good, but we are very dependent on highways authorities for making the changes. So what should our goals, what's our impact going to be? And then distribution and number of inspectors. As I say, it's brilliant that we've got so many, but they're quite, they're not spread as you might hope over everything. And I think I came up with some statistics that we've got 52 areas which we oversee as the PNFS. 12 have no inspectors at all. So of the 52, 12 have no inspectors at all. And only 11 have got every parish covered. So that's quite a surprise to me, really, to know that. But there's plenty of options for people who want to take on parishes, David, isn't there? Plenty of possibility. So that's something we wanted to discuss. Engaging with others, and so there's other societies, there's the Ramblers, and we're meeting with them soon, actually. There's publicity, and social media is something that wasn't on anybody's mind in 1894. So that's something to think about. So we took those things and we all gathered together. I think there was about a dozen of us actually on the day, wasn't there? And we had some discussions about all of those. And then, as with any good workshop like that, you need to come up with a priority list. We also did what's called a SWOT analysis. So we looked at the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities and the threats. And I won't go through all of that, but I think some of the strengths are around the fact that we have got a sort of public status. We have been here a long time. Our footpath inspection database is a wonder to behold for those who haven't had a look at it, but it's really, really valuable, contains a huge amount of information. So things like that are really positive. Some of our weaknesses are, and if we look around, this is really writ large, we're not the most diverse society. And I think all research would suggest that, you have got more, you're more likely to have better outcomes and sustainability if you are diverse. And it's something we've discussed at AGMs before, it's something we've talked about. So that was something we certainly wanted to talk about. Opportunities, you know, for example, there's things like the Path Checkers app. I don't know if has anybody met the Path Checkers app?
I'll say a bit more about it.
You'll say about that later, but you know, is there opportunities for that sort of thing to be marketed? Who knows? I don't know, but it's possible, isn't it? So, you know, there are some serious opportunities, and perhaps more opportunities around our partnerships with other organisations, parish councils and so on. Threats. I think one of the big threats is sort of slightly out of our hand, or very out of our hands, and that's the funding for the highways authorities. They're part of the councils, and as I think I mentioned, you know, austerity feels as though it's snapping at our heels, doesn't it? And we know that local authorities have to balance, they have a legal statutory duty to balance their budgets. And if you're going to measure up, you know, helping somebody, an older person in their home with social help compared with the highways, what do you do? So I think that is a potential threat. We did talk as well about our headquarters of Taylor House, and I think it's both a threat and an opportunity, because it does obviously cost to upkeep, but we had some opportunity discussions around could we rent it out, and we've got it in, thanks to Dave Brown and his wife, it's in much better shape than it was and has been rearranged to make it more a meeting place. So we talked all about those things and lots more, and we came up with some areas of priority. So at the end of the day, we felt that succession planning was a key priority, because if you don't do that, you kind of wither away eventually. And so that's something that I think myself and David have taken on to work on. Generally, recruiting, again, is something that we felt was important. You know, the more we can do to increase the numbers in the society. And also our operating model, we think that we could do more with that to allow a bit more devolution to the areas within our whole region. And we also prioritised having some improvement goals and some public benefits. We are a charity, you know, we function under the rules of the Charity Commission, and it's really important we can describe to both our membership, our volunteers and our membership, what are we doing with the resource that we have. And publicity, as I mentioned, it was one of the things from 2018 that we probably haven't really got right yet. So again, we've got a strand on that. So our plan with all of that is we've divvied out, as I say, as an example, David and I are taking the succession bit, but trustees and others have taken on work streams to sort of move those things forward. We will also write up things into a forward-looking strategy for sort of 3 to 5 years, and when we've kind of all agreed that, we'll get that onto the website. But today it'd be good to get your sort of sense, thinking about those key priorities, as I say, recruitment, succession planning, operating model, improvement goals and publicity. Do those sound like reasonable things for us to prioritise for the moment? There are others I've touched on which would come behind those and perhaps be the next tranche of priorities. So that's just to give you a flavour of you know, where we are, the sort of discussions we've had, and how we're proposing to keep moving society forward, so that in another 100 years, people are still having these discussions. Hopefully they'll have fixed all the footpath issues by then. Who knows? So, any comments, questions, thoughts? Are we barking up the wrong tree? I don't know.
Can I just ask, you mentioned that in some areas we don't have many volunteers,
yes,
inspectors and that. Is that because we don't have many members?
So that's an interesting point, isn't it? Mel, do you want to just...
Well, over the last 2 issues of Signpost, I've done an analysis of our membership, and anybody who has been reading the upbeat titled Membership Matters will see that our membership is quite skewed. For instance, if we look at Cheshire, Derbyshire and Greater Manchester, that is something of the order of 3/4 of our membership, and yet it is only 3 of the 8 regions that we actually cover. And you get the same pattern when you look at our affiliates. So I think there's a big challenge there for us to reach out into those other areas, contact walking groups, parish councils particularly. We've increased a number of affiliates from parish councils by twofold in the last 3 years. And if you look at how many parishes we cover 1,400 parishes, and I think only about 20 are affiliated to us. So there's a big opportunity there as well. And parish councils are very, in some ways, very proactive in promoting rights of ways. So I think there's a really big opportunity there as well.
So absolutely, there is a correlation, and I think there's a bit of a correlation with where our signposts are as well, which are quite good ambassadors for us. Sometimes people have never heard of, you say PNFS or Pekin Northern Foot, and they look at you blank, and then you say, have you seen our site? Oh yes, I've seen those when I've been out and about. So I think Mel's quite nicely described, the opportunity there. One of our problems though, and one of the reasons to sort of try and encourage more people, particularly to volunteer and do things, is our capacity amongst the really active people who are trying to manage, all the links with the highways authorities and all of those other links, and get out and inspect paths, and do some of this more proactive linking work and so on. So it's a plea really, if you feel you've got time that you're not using to the maximum on something else, or you'd like to divert your time into this, there are many, many opportunities. And if you let any of us know on the committee to about this, and it might be worth us just saying who's here as a trustee today. You're going to hear from David Gosling, who's my vice chair and looks after all the inspectors and generally does loads of stuff, frankly. Mel, I've mentioned, does sterling work on the membership. Tim is one of our newer trustees actually, and is taking on some of the areas for development as well. Who else? Any other trustees here?
David Brown.
Oh, David Brown. God, what is wrong with me? David Brown, who's our certainly at least until the AGM, has stepped in to be our secretary again. He was previously the secretary, but Jenny Allen, who was the secretary, has had to stop doing that because of family commitments, and Dave has very kindly stepped in to do that and is a trustee as well. And it's worth mentioning that Dave Pratt is our president. Do you want to sort of say hello? President. He's had a previous stint of being president, but the arm was twisted back at the back or something like that. Anyway, he's come back as president again, which is great.
Should point out, Kathy, this is the third coming.
The third. I've missed one somewhere along the. Right. Yes, multiple. Yes, phoenix from the ashes. So do talk to any of us if you have that desire. Any other questions, comments? Yes, please.
Could you tell me what the society is doing or has been doing on historical research on historical paths? Where is what part of the
Ken,
lost ways?
Ken. Would you like to say something? Because you're our chief, finder of lost ways and all such things.
Derbyshire only.
Derbyshire only, all right.
It's quite limited, yeah. Well, we put in 70 or 80 applications in Derbyshire. They're not necessarily lost paths, they're unrecorded paths. And my initial approach was to try and protect what we thought we'd got, which we probably hadn't got. Because there's a lot in Derbyshire of paths we did use, but they weren't recorded as public rights of way. But there are some brand new ones as well that are, and I've recently put one in at Balladon, which is a very hidden path nobody knows about. It's on the list of streets, but it's not on the definitive map. So yes, but it is restricted to Derbyshire. So if anybody knows any gaps or hints in Derbyshire, I've just volunteered to work with the Ramblers on Don't Lose Your Way, whatever they call it. So there may be some others to look at. But they've tended to look at footpaths that were marked on the Ordnance Survey maps. And my experience has been there's normally an explanation as to why they're not on the definitive map now. Obviously I've not investigated them all, but the ones I have investigated, there's a reason why they're not there.
Thank you, Ken. So it sounds as though there's opportunity outside of Derbyshire for doing some intensive work on this. That's another area. And also worth noting that at Taylor House there's quite a lot of ancient maps and so on, which is quite interesting, isn't it? And I think they're stored there. So David.
Yeah, most of you I'm sure will know that the government has withdrawn the 2026 deadline. Although it's not gone through legislation yet, we have promised that it will happen in time. And in some ways that extends the opportunity because we can carry on finding lost ways for the future. In other ways, it's taken off some of the pressure that was perhaps generating activity. So there are two ways of looking at that, but I prefer to look at it positively and say that we've now got more time to continue this work over the next few years, and we shouldn't let off just because the deadline's not there anymore.
Good. Thank you.
Has there been any link up between the Slowways initiative and the society?
Yes.
Slowways,
yes.
yes.
Slowways. Do you want to
Yeah,
talk about
yeah.
that?
We have had contact with them. Ken has reviewed quite a few sites. We've got if you look on our YouTube channel, there's a film there with Diane Raven Ellison, but it's not a very formal relationship really. It's any members who can go out there and review paths and all to the good. I guess we could. Well, we were in discussion with them as to whether we could have a slightly more formalised relationship, but I think we've left it that anybody who can research slowways, so much the better. Does everybody know about slowways? Most people know about it. Okay, well I won't explain it then. But you can always look it up on a website. Slowways. It's an attempt to have a footpath network across the whole country. It's tremendously ambitious. The idea being that you could pick any 2 points where you might want to walk, from here to Chesterfield or wherever, and the Slowways website will suggest a route. And the idea is to review those routes so that you can actually see whether they're viable, whether it involves steep hills, steps, stiles, whether you've got to do a bit of road walking or whether it's all off-road. That's the idea of the reviews, so that it gives you more information beyond what is actually sort of on a map.
Yeah.
I was going to say regarding the slowways, I wonder if Peter Northern, the fault reporting app, could be promoted to slowways if reviewers find problems in our region.
Yes.
It's a good idea.
Yeah, well, that's a good idea, Ken. We'll try and follow that up.
It's a good idea. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Only having recently joined, I don't know a lot about the history of the organisation, but was it originally set up on county boundaries, or has it expanded or shrunk over the generations?
Who wants to pick up the history bit of how was it actually set? Was it county boundaries or what? Anybody?
Well, we deal with 35 highway authorities who are either counties or metropolitan boroughs. I'm looking at Rhoda here, correct me.
Or unitary.
Yeah, or unitary authorities, so 35 altogether. And that's important because when we find a problem, that's who we report to, because they've got the enforcement powers that we don't have. But the actual boundary that we worked to was set, I think, in 1981, the Countryside Act. I think that's where. Is that correct?
I don't know. I'm not sure.
I believe so. So what happened there is that we are prescribed authority, not proscribed, prescribed authority, which means that within that boundary, the authorities have to consult us on any legal changes to the footpath network. So at that point, the society had to define its boundaries to say, this side of the boundary, yes, you have to consult us. Outside of that boundary, you don't. Although surprisingly, there are other authorities occasionally, Hertfordshire for some reason, tell us what they're doing, and we have to say, well, that's interesting, but, you know. But I think that's probably just some junior person in there who doesn't understand what they're doing, basically, which is something we come across quite a lot. So that's why we've got the boundaries that we have, because within it we have to be consulted.
But does it cover the same area as the original setup?
I think so,
We-
yes.
Yeah, our current boundaries are those that were set in
Because county
1981.
boundaries might have changed
If you go back
slightly.
to the longer history, then it was much more an informal arrangement.
Right.
You know, but if you start going back to the 1890s or even the first 50 years of the society's life. But it is quite interesting to see, if you look at annual reports going back, say, to the 1930s, they were really dealing with a lot of the same problems that we are now. That is to say, people were writing to them then, in the 1930s, and saying, we've got this problem, the footpath is blocked, and then they tried to investigate it and tried to deal with the authorities to get it unblocked. The principal difference then was that in some cases the footpaths were contested, whereas now we have the legal support of the definitive map, which says these are the rights of way, and it's only the ones which are not recorded that Ken's referred to, which a more fuzzy area.
So
It's worth
Dave,
remembering that the society was formed as the Peak District and Northern Counties
yes,
Society, which is why we have so much emphasis on the Peak District, and it's always been based around Stockport,
yes,
which explains the skewed membership
yes.
historically.
Yeah.
I think you're right there.
But even in the early days, they were getting reports from Cheshire, for example, and South Derbyshire. You know, I think it gradually grew by reputation, and then it was the boundaries were, as I said, formally set.
So some areas, for example, Staffordshire, as has been mentioned, we are thin on the ground in Staffordshire, so you know we are looking for more help in Staffordshire.
Are there equivalent organisations in other parts of the country?
I don't.
Um,
Well,
Children's Society.
there is. Yeah, there is one at least.
Just one of them.
Yes, but you know, obviously the Ramblers also has some role and so on, but we are sort of different. Now, just so that you know, the current chair of the society has an ambition that we should cover the whole country. But never mind. It's an ambition that's probably shared by no other person. But never mind, we have to. Can I pick up John, who wanted to come in, and then I'll get the other ones.
Yeah, John Harker, I'm an area officer and a courts and inquiries officer. Touching on the unrecorded routes that Terry brought up, and it may also touch on the strategy day. Did the strategy day ever give any thought to, and this is a very dangerous subject I'm straying into, ever consider whether or not the society has got enough funds to have at least a part-time paid person doing some of the admin work, and also whether or not, with regard to some of the unrecorded routes, whether or not if the evidence can be found, whether it would be worth employing a rights of way consultant to take forward some of these cases on our behalf. I mean, if Ken is probably the only one really doing this on any kind of regular basis, and we have another 34 authorities to cover, whether or not some consideration ought to be given to farming out some of the work to people who could devote the time and skill to proceeding with those. I mean, just using Doncaster, which is an area I know as an example, there's a huge area of Doncaster out beyond, toward Goole, Fish Lake, Syke House, if you've ever walked out that way, which very few people do. there's a whole network of green lanes, and the Doncaster Local Access Forum in its early days actually paid a rights of way consultant called Robin Carr, who Rhoda will know, to do some research, and he turned up a whole network of unrecorded ways. And his report to the Local Access Forum, of which I've got a copy, said that all these ought to be claimed.
Yeah.
And nothing's ever happened because basically nobody has taken it forward. Doncaster Borough Council haven't done anything with it. They've just sat on it. I mean, this kind of thing is really something that we need to be pushing. And to rely on volunteers is, in my opinion, not fair, because I'm snowed under and I know Rhoda is, and we're very lucky to have somebody like Ken in Derbyshire. But you know, it's just not enough.
No. So just on those points, we have had some discussion about, in fact, you, David, a couple of nights ago we were talking about this whole business of admin support as to whether, you know, there is a potential. So I think that's something that the management meeting will continue to have reflections on, because there are some things around just keeping the background going, you know, the sort of administrative things, which you know, might be something for us to think about. In terms of the consultant bit, again, we can take that into the discussions around that, because it's a challenge, isn't it? And we don't have, as you say, it's this succession bit as well. You know, not only it's also how much do we want to do, you know, as a society, how much do we want to do? So really good points. Thank you, John. Mel, I think you wanted to come in, and then I think we've got a question there, and then and one here, and then I think and there, and then we'll stop and go on to David.
Well, I'm glad that John touched on Doncaster, because if you look in the footpath inspection database, there are hardly any reported inspections there at all. And considering that Doncaster is a stone's throw from here, I think that is not far short of shameful, to be honest. I don't quite have your aspiration about covering the whole country, although I have talked to David and I'm not sure that we've come to an agreement about this. But I think what we might explore is expanding the inspection database to cover the counties that adjoin our present area. And one reason I suggest that is because in Nottinghamshire we have 4 affiliated groups already. So there are people in Nottinghamshire who value the society, get something from the society, and okay, we give them information about the area we now cover, but it wouldn't be difficult to give them information about Nottinghamshire as well.
Yeah.
The East Riding, again, just beyond Doncaster, has got some very attractive walking and lots of walking groups. And the local council there have got a fabulous walking information site. So again, opportunities there for us as well.
So Dave's taking a note of some of these ideas that are coming up, aren't you, Dave? I can see you writing down there. So that's definitely things for us to bring into the mix of discussion. Right, I think I've got there, and then I will go to yourself, and then you, and then over here. Thank you. Yes?
Yeah, I'm Basil Murray from Chesterfield, which is just down the road, and you can walk there already, so don't worry. You can do it anyway. You mentioned Nottinghamshire, and that's what I was going to bring up, because I noticed you've got 19 members there already,
Yes, that's right.
despite not covering the area. You may not be aware that the 4 authorities in Nottinghamshire and Derbyshire, with the Nottingham City and Derby City, are currently voting on a combined mayoral authority. So there will be, the voting is actually going on in the 4 authorities over these next 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So there could well be a mayor in the same way as South Yorkshire and Greater Manchester, and that is covering infrastructure. So the link is there.
So, absolutely. So for those who don't know, there's been agreed, it was agreed by the previous minister before, however many ministers we are further down the track, who knows. Just before, I think that all the Prime Minister changed for the first time in the summer, that there would be devolution for, they call it D2N2 because you've got 2 councils in Derbyshire and 2 in Nottinghamshire. So yeah, that's a good point to think about, that links there. So that's really helpful. And then I think we'll go over to you. It's great if you introduce yourself at the same time.
Okay.
That's lovely.
Brian Lomas, Failsworth, which is in Oldham. Just picking up on what David was saying about the cut-off date being abandoned now. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't be working towards recognising these lost rights of way, but I know from conversations with David that there could be a danger that we just overwhelm the local authorities with these reports, and we won't have the resources to deal with them.
I think we see that, to be honest. I mean, Rhoda might want to come in, but I'm sure Rhoda is going to say, never mind, that's not our problem. We can overwhelm them. But we do see this in some of the authorities. I think we talk a lot about Lancashire, don't we? I know that's a bit further to the west, but it's really tough to get anything done over there. Rhoda, do you want to say what you really want to say?
I think it's a good thing to overwhelm them, because councils don't know the scale of the problem. I mean, it's the same with reporting faults, broken stiles, gates, whatever. Unless you report them, unless you tell the council, they don't know the scale of their problem, and they have no incentive to increase their staffing. Now, at the moment, we're certainly not in an increasing the staffing situation, but presumably it will change. And also the fact, I mean, the important fact when there was a 2026 deadline was that any application which was made before that deadline would have been safeguarded, which is why some of the applications which I worked on with Ken were for tiddly little bits, which, you know, it was important to get the applications in so that they would be safeguarded. Now there isn't that pressure, but we should still be making as many applications as we possibly can so that the council can eventually get round to determining them. So I would disagree with what you were saying.
So keep them flowing in. It is the same, as you say, around the faults reporting. I know, for example, there's something I've recently reported about a signpost. Ken happened to go and see it and let me know. He says, I see you've reported this, but just to let you know, it's still lying on the ground. You know, and that's the situation, isn't it? So important point from Rhoda there. Yourself, yes, thank you.
Something completely different. I noticed the carbon dioxide monitor in the corner is glowing red, which is an indication that the air circulation in here isn't too good. I wonder whether we would agree to having the fire doors open, or otherwise people who feel particularly vulnerable might put on a mask.
Well, they've got air conditioning you can ask to switch on.
It's not alarmed, is it?
No,
Oh, right, okay. Good point. That somebody's keeping an eye on, you know, it's a bit like a canary in a coal mine. What's going to happen next? You know? Thank you for that. Let's take a last, I think it's the last point, really.
Okay.
Oh no, and another one, so 2 last points.
Yeah, Derek Brody, our officer for the High Peak, I think at times. 2 comments. In the threats and opportunities that you highlighted. I keep banging on about this, but the climate change did not feature in the threats. And I think it is a real threat to the whole existence of the nature that we enjoy when we're out walking. And I'm still disappointed that the society has not reviewed its investments to ensure that they are actually not contributing to climate change. And I will keep banging on about that until hopefully the society listens, because time is short. Especially as we're at COP27 at the moment. So that's a threat. The opportunity, path checkers' comments come through to inspectors and to area officers. It would be wonderful if a clever bit of technology behind that app could actually report the fog directly to DCC at the same time.
That could be done, because we could work out from the grid reference what the local authority is, and have just a lookup table that will give us an email address. I think one thing that I don't think we've ever been very good at, and Terry emailed me about it this week to say, would it be possible for our website to simply list the contact details for all the highway authorities so that it was visible and easy to access? And at the moment it is actually still quite difficult. It wouldn't be difficult to do, it might be more problematic to maintain. maintain because web links change all the time.
Yeah,
So-
I think the problem
But
is
it
also
would be worth doing.
yeah, it would be worth doing.
Yeah.
But with a lot of local authorities now, I think they actually have a reporting network online.
Yeah, they
It
do.
is not a simple email
It
address,
isn't, no.
but it would be
No.
wonderful if actually we could look at trying to expand that to
Yeah.
Well,
what we do.
when we set up path checkers, we deliberately didn't do that.
No, I understand that.
And the idea is really to protect our reputation.
Yeah.
And that's why we have, if you like, a quality control over
Yeah.
the reports that we put in. Otherwise, there could be duplication, and some of the reports that need further investigation. You know, people like David here, David Gartside here, has looked at some of them around Congleton, for example. You know, and we've had to filter them
I
before.
understand that, but the path checkers does give us a name, and it could go through in the name of that person, and that could be part of the permissions granted
Yeah.
by using
Okay.
path checkers.
We
Well,
can certainly
let's think
take
about
that
it,
away
yeah.
and have a look at it. I think there is something though of ensuring that the society has a role in things, isn't it? Otherwise you could argue what's
They
the
will,
point.
but I mean, the path checkers would still generate a report to an inspector, to the area officer,
Yeah.
and there may well be a follow-up
Yes.
report.
We'll
as a
take that
result of
away, David,
Yeah.
rather, and have a look
Yeah.
at that.
Thank
So
you.
Dave can write that down. Did you want to come in on that?
If we may, we shouldn't forget the climate emergency.
No,
Today in Sheffield at 12 o'clock, there is a demonstration
I was going to be saying
in
about
the
that.
middle of town, and that will go on for several hours. So after the meeting, I would encourage anybody to go along and take part, just to show their solidarity with people.
Will the society stand bail for anybody who gets arrested?
Well, I doubt whether anybody will get arrested. I think the police have been told.
And I think if you go, you go on your own terms, really. But that's fine. Did you want to come in on that point around the path checkers? at the
Yes,
back?
please.
Yeah.
David Gartside, 3 parishes in Cheshire, East and 2 in Staffordshire. On the point of should the path checkers process have an automatic link to local authorities, I would be very concerned about that. I've had several path checker reports which are either, I don't believe, have been substantiated. One wasn't even on a right of way. One was completely in the wrong place and took a lot of finding. I would also be concerned that if a path checker's report scrutinised by an inspector, and I'm not trying to make a job for myself here, quite the contrary, if it went in, ostensibly bearing the name of PNFS, I'd be very concerned, because I think over time I've done quite a bit of work in establishing a reputation with my local PROW people and the authorities, who then think, well, if it's David's, it's probably right, you know, and we'll treat it seriously. And obviously some of the ones I've had in weren't right, and
Yeah.
could have undermined our credibility.
Okay, thank you. So I think there is something. I think we'll debate that elsewhere, but I think we've got the gist of all of that. I think that's really helpful. Thank you. Now you're going to have the honour of the last
okay.
question, I think.
I'm Jim Cowley. I live in Sheffield, and I'm an inspector for some parishes in the immediately adjoining part of the Peak District. I was interested in the item in your strategy about publicity.
Yes.
And I think I did raise this once before, a good number of years ago,
Right.
maybe at an AGM or half day meeting, and got a fairly frosty reception. But so the issue of publicity, it's whether as a charity we would take on campaigning visibly about issues we were concerned about, either generally or specifically, as a weapon in our armoury of pressure on local authorities to fulfil their statutory responsibilities. And I think it may be that when I raised it before, some people felt that this was incompatible with our charitable status. That's absolutely not the case. There was a well-publicised intervention from somebody occupying one of the most senior posts in the Charities Commission only recently, saying that campaigning by charities over issues related to their charitable objectives didn't mean that they were doing something illegitimately political, that it was quite proper for them to make political interventions.
Yep.
So I just,
Yes,
I'm
I hear
interested
that.
to know whether as your part of your ongoing consideration about publicity, that it would encompass issues such as what I've just raised.
So I think that's the sort of thing that we would need to consider under that, and also the trustees and so on would need to consider, you know, what were the right things and what was in line with our constitution and our objects. But it's certainly something to add to the list of, you know, we couldn't discuss everything in one session, obviously, but, you know, I think that publicity thing, I think we were probably thinking more about how we attract people to come to us, but I think it's a good point about what do we make statements about out there. And, you know, and there have been things where we've got involved in terms of the things in the press, and fairly recently actually there have been things in that, and we have to have a position. So again, these things take up a lot of, they do take up a lot of time actually, that sort of thing. So, but it's a good point again. Really helpful to hear your various angles on this, because that's the reason to bring it here really, is we could only, you know, you come at it with your own views, we need everybody's views. So really helpful actually in we'll take all those things and keep debating and then get things into the strategy. And again, we've set it up so that when we have written the strategy, we will review it annually to just not dramatically change, but to tweak depending on the circumstances.